Hello students, continuing with the development of the cardiovascular system, in today's lecture I will discuss the formation of aorticopulmonary septum and development of valves. So before starting the lecture, I would like to request you kindly subscribe my channel because in the end you just forget to subscribe the channel. So it's my request to you. So kindly subscribe and share it. Now, with the discussion of aorticopulmonary septum formation. So this is just arising from the spiral septum. Now this spiral septum is developing from the truncal ridges. So what are these truncal ridges? These are basically they develop due to proliferation of the mesenchymal cells derived from the neural crest, which later on migrate in the wall of truncus arteriosus near the conus. So these truncal ridges, they grow and fuse to form the spiral septum. So from the neural crest cells, they migrate to the truncus arteriosus and they join to form the spiral septum, which is basically forming the aorticopulmonary septum. Now, if we see the with the rotation of the spiral septum, you can see as the spiral septum is just rotating. So the relationship of the pulmonary trunk and aorta with each other differ in the lower part, middle part, and upper part. In the lower part and in the upper part, the spiral septum is lying in the coronal plane. You can see in the upper part and lower part, they are lying in the coronal plane. But in the middle portion, this spiral septum is lying in the sagittal plane. Now, because of this rotation, in the lower portion, the pulmonary trunk is lying anteriorly and the aorta is lying just posterior to that. That is, ascending aorta is posterior and pulmonary trunk anterior. And with the rotation of this spiral septum, the pulmonary trunk and aorta, they lie side by side with aorta on the right side and pulmonary trunk on the left side. And for the upper portion, this aorta is lying anteriorly and pulmonary trunk posteriorly. You can see in the diagram. Now this aorta is visible in the anterior portion and pulmonary trunk is going posteriorly. But in this portion, the pulmonary trunk is anterior but aorta is posterior. But in the middle portion, they are lying side by side. So this is the fate. Now this is the diagram showing again the same picture as in adult heart. You can see the location or relationship between the aorta and pulmonary trunk. So I told you this pulmonary trunk is lying anterior in the lower portion, but it is lying in posterior to the aorta in the upper portion, but in the middle they are lying side by side. Now coming to this condition, that is patent ductus arteriosus, the spiral septum may not be formed at all. So that lead to the condition that is patent ductus arteriosus. So the partial absence of the septum leads to the communications called shunts between the aorta and pulmonary trunk. You can see here. So the communication is there when the spiral septum is not completely dividing the truncus arteriosus into two portions. So that lead on to the condition that is PDA, that is patent ductus arteriosus, which just constitute about the 10 to 12% of all the congenital heart diseases. So coming to the next development, that is the development of valves. So in this category, we will discuss the development of tricuspid, bicuspid and pulmonary and aortic valves. So this is the picture showing the tricuspid valve and the valves of the aorta and pulmonary trunk, which are semilunar in shape. Now coming to the tricuspid valves, they guard the right AV canal. So we have discussed how the different chambers of the heart they are formed. So this tricuspid valve is basically guarding that right atrioventricular canal. In the AV canal, subendocardial mesenchymal proliferation, it happens and forms three swellings which are lying anterior, posterior and on the septal wall. Now the swellings, they proliferate and meet each other in the lumen. The free margin of these swellings, they do not fuse with each other. So this is the fate, how these are formed. And basically all the valves, they are because of the proliferation of the subendocardial mesenchyme. Now, continuing with that tricuspid valve development, when blood start flowing, that mesenchymal tissue, it degenerates and is replaced by the connective tissue. The ventricular surface of these swelling is hollowed and cusps are formed. Now, there are three cusps depending upon the location of those mesenchymal proliferation. So, three cusps are there on the right side, that is anterior, posterior and septal. So basically, what are these cusps? These are the made up of connective tissue covered by endocardium. The free margin of these valves on ventricular side are connected by thick trabeculae in the wall of ventricle, that is papillary muscle, by thin tendinous cord which are known as chordae tendineae. In the adult heart, you must have seen that the papillary muscles which are present in the wall of the ventricle, they are connected with the cusp through the cords, and those cords are given the name chordae tendineae. Now same story is with the mitral valve. They guard the left AV canal, but only difference is that there are only two swellings that which are lying anteriorly and posteriorly. But you can say the origin of these anterior and posterior swelling is because of the subendocardial mesenchymal proliferation. So in the same way, the two cusps are formed as they were formed in the tricuspid valve. So same story is there. So you can see in the diagram, in both the bicuspid and tricuspid valves, the hollowed portion which is facing the ventricle, they are connected with the papillary muscles to the chordae tendineae. So this is the fate, how they are formed. You can see in the two diagrams. In first diagram, you can see the mesenchymal proliferation is happening, and this is the lumen of the ventricle, and in this case, the cusps, they are related with the papillary muscles through the chordae tendineae. Now coming to the pulmonary and aortic valves, these are formed by the endocardial cushions that are formed at the junction of truncus, arteriosus and conus. So you can, if we see the junctional point of that structure, that is the junctional point between truncus and arteriosus and conus, the endocardial cushions they develop. There are two right and left, and then the two anterior and posterior cushions are formed. You can see the four cushions over here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 cushions are formed. So 2, that is right and left, then anterior and posterior. Now truncus arteriosus has 4 cushions. That is very clear in the diagram. Now coming to the, due to aorticopulmonary septum, right and left cushions, they divide into 2 parts. One part each going to aortic and pulmonary opening. Now if we see the demarcation point, so they just separate at this level. So once they get separate at this level, if we see the single portion over here, so single endocardial, you can say proliferation is anteriorly and 2 are lying posteriorly. And if we see the posterior segment, the 2 are lying anteriorly and 1 is lying posteriorly. So in this case, one part each going to the aortic and pulmonary opening because of the formation of spiral septum, that portion is formed, and similarly the bifurcation of that lead on to the in which the pulmonary opening is first ventral to the aortic opening, you can see in the diagram B. So that is very much clear to you. Now the heart undergoes partial rotation to the left, as we all know that once the rotation of the heart is happening, when in my previous lecture I have discussed that sinus venosus is coming and lying to the posterior side. So that is because of the rotation of the heart. Now once the partial rotation is happening, so you can see the movement of the axis. As a result, the pulmonary opening comes to lie anterior and to the left of aortic opening. You can see in the diagram D. So thus correspondingly cusps acquire their definite position. You can see in the diagram D. Now pulmonary trunk has 2 anterior and 1 posterior cusp, you can see. So with the rotation of this, so initially there was single cusp anteriorly and 2 were posteriorly, but here once the rotation is happening, the 2 cusps they come anteriorly and 1 is posteriorly, and opposite story is seen in the aortic valve. So aorta has 1 anterior and 2 posterior cusps. So you can see in the diagram, initially the 2 cushions they develop. So you can see and right and left, then anterior and posterior, then the separation of these truncus arteriosus portion is happening because of the formation of the spiral septum, and after that the rotation is happening. That is, once the rotation is happening, this pulmonary trunk come and lie on the left side of this aorta. With this, the rotation of the cusp is also, it happens. So all these diagrams are taken from your textbooks. They are very, you can consult or you can see those diagrams in your textbooks. So they are very much clear to you. So in my slide, I have shown you how these diagrams are basically, what they depict basically. So that was my aim.